After we swallow our food, it travels down the esophagus and reaches the stomach. But what exactly happens there?
Is the stomach just a place where food is stored? Well, not really. The stomach stores food, sure, but it also mixes it, starts protein digestion, protects us from many microorganisms, and controls the movement of food into the small intestine.
Here's a quick look at our agenda today. 1. What is the stomach? 2. Parts of the stomach. 3. The two curvatures. 4. Openings and sphincters. And 5. Stomach wall layers. So in this explainer, let's understand the structure of the stomach in a very simple way.
Section 1. What is the stomach?
The stomach is a J-shaped muscular organ that forms an important part of our digestive system. It is located right between the esophagus and the duodenum, which is the first part of the small intestine. Most of the stomach actually lies in the upper left part of the abdomen. Its main job? To receive and temporarily store food, mix it with gastric secretions, and gradually release the partially digested food into the small intestine.
Moving on to Section 2. Parts of the stomach. Let's first look at the different parts of the stomach. The stomach is divided into 4 main regions: cardia, fundus, body, and pyloric part.
The cardia is the region where the esophagus enters the stomach. So, simply remember, esophagus, then down to the cardia, then the stomach. Right above the level of the main stomach is the fundus. It is the rounded upper part of the stomach and can also act as a temporary storage area, especially for swallowed air and food. Then we have the body, which is the largest central part of the stomach. This is where a lot of the mixing and gastric activity actually takes place. Finally, we have the pyloric part, which connects the stomach to the duodenum. It includes the pyloric antrum and pyloric canal, ending at the pylorus.
Section 3. The two curvatures. Now let's look at the two borders of the stomach.
The shorter, concave border is called the lesser curvature. The longer, convex border is called the greater curvature.
So, an easy way to remember this: lesser curvature equals shorter and concave, greater curvature equals longer and convex.
Up next, Section 4. Openings and sphincters. The stomach has 2 really important openings.
The upper opening is where the esophagus enters the stomach. This is the cardiac opening. The lower opening connects the stomach to the duodenum. This is the pyloric opening.
At the lower end is the pyloric sphincter. It acts just like a gate and controls the passage of stomach contents into the duodenum. The region at the gastroesophageal junction also helps prevent the backward movement of gastric contents into the esophagus.
All right, Section 5. Stomach wall layers. Now let's zoom in and look at the wall of the stomach.
Like most parts of the gastrointestinal tract, the stomach wall has 4 major layers. From outside to inside, they are serosa, muscularis, submucosa, and mucosa. The outer covering is the serosa. It provides protection and helps reduce friction with surrounding organs.
Next is the muscular layer. The stomach is pretty special because its muscularis has 3 layers of smooth muscle. The outer layer is longitudinal, the middle layer is circular, and the inner layer is oblique. These 3 layers work perfectly together to contract and mix the food. Below the muscular layer is the submucosa. It contains connective tissue, blood vessels, lymphatic vessels, and nerves. And the innermost layer is the mucosa. This is where we find the gastric pits and gastric glands, which produce important gastric secretions.
So now we know the basic structure of the stomach, from its different regions and curvatures right down to the microscopic layers of its wall. But what happens inside these gastric glands? What do parietal cells, chief cells, and G cells actually do?
Today, we're looking at gastric glands and their cells. What happens when food enters the stomach, the main functions, a quick clinical connection, and then a complete revision. We're going to understand exactly what happens inside the stomach to help us digest our food. Let's kick things off with Section 1, gastric glands and their cells. This is honestly one of the most crucial parts of stomach physiology. So the lining of your stomach is packed with these little indentations called gastric pits. And these pits, well, they open up into deeper gastric glands. Inside these glands, it's like a highly specialized factory. You've got different types of cells, and every single one has a very specific, absolutely vital job. Let's break them down one by one. First up, we have mucus cells, and, well, the name totally gives it away. They produce mucus. But it's not just any mucus. This forms a heavy-duty protective layer right over the stomach lining. It's essentially a shield that protects the stomach's own cells from being destroyed by its harsh gastric acid and digestive enzymes. Pretty smart, right? Next are the parietal cells. These guys are the heavy lifters that produce hydrochloric acid, or HCl. This HCl is exactly what makes your stomach so incredibly acidic, and we need that highly acidic environment to kickstart protein digestion and, crucially, to convert inactive pepsinogen into active pepsin. Oh, and parietal cells also churn out something called intrinsic factor. That is super important because it's what allows your body to absorb vitamin B12 later on down in the ileum. Moving on, we've got the chief cells. Now, chief cells produce pepsinogen. By itself, pepsinogen is completely inactive. It's just waiting for a cue. But the moment it hits that highly acidic stomach environment we just talked about, boom, it activates and transforms into pepsin. And pepsin is the enzyme that actually gets to work breaking down large proteins into much smaller peptides. Finally, we round out the team with G cells. These are endocrine cells, and their job is to produce a hormone called gastrin. You can think of gastrin as the manager. It basically stimulates overall gastric activity and signals for even more gastric acid secretion to keep the whole digestive process moving. All right, section 2. What happens when food enters the stomach? Let's put all those pieces together. Imagine you've just swallowed a bite of food. It travels right down the esophagus and drops into the stomach. First, the stomach just sort of receives and stores it. But then, the thick muscles in the stomach wall wake up and start contracting. They mix and churn that food, blending it with all those gastric secretions we just covered. While it's being tossed around, the HCl and digestive enzymes are aggressively breaking it down. Gradually, that solid bite of food transforms into a thick, semi-liquid paste that we call chyme. From there, a valve called the pyloric sphincter carefully regulates how this chyme exits the stomach and moves into the duodenum. That brings us to section 3, the main functions of the stomach. What is the big picture here? Well, there's a really easy way to remember the 5 major jobs. Just think: store, mix, digest, protect, and empty. First off, storage. Your stomach is essentially a temporary holding tank. When we eat, it stores the food so we can comfortably consume a full meal without completely overwhelming the small intestine all at once. Second is mixing. This is a purely mechanical action. That muscular wall we mentioned, it forcefully contracts, mashing the food and mixing it with gastric juices to physically break everything down into tiny particles, eventually forming that semi-liquid chyme. Third, we have digestion. Now, the stomach's main focus here is protein digestion, thanks mostly to that active pepsin. It does contribute a tiny bit to fat digestion too, though to be fair, the vast majority of fat breakdown actually happens later on in the small intestine. Function number 4 is protection. This is twofold. That extreme acidic environment, it's basically a highly effective acid bath that destroys most of the harmful microorganisms trying to sneak in with our food. But at the same time, that thick mucus barrier we talked about is busy protecting the stomach lining from digesting itself. And function 5 is controlled emptying. The stomach definitely does not just dump all its contents into the small intestine at once. That would be a disaster. Instead, the pyloric sphincter acts like a strict bouncer, ensuring only a gradual, controlled passage of chyme enters the duodenum. Okay, moving on to section 4, a quick clinical connection, because it really helps to tie all this physiology to something we actually see in everyday life. So normally the gastroesophageal junction at the top acts like a trap door to stop stomach contents from splashing backwards into the esophagus. But what happens when those highly acidic contents actually do manage to move backward? Well, that's what we call acid reflux. When that stomach acid escapes up into the esophagus, it directly causes those incredibly uncomfortable symptoms, like heartburn. It really drives home exactly why those protective mechanisms at the stomach entrance and that mucus lining inside are absolutely crucial for our comfort and health. All right, let's wrap this up with section 5, a complete physiology revision. Let's do a rapid-fire recap of everything we just learned. Quick anatomy recap. The stomach is a J-shaped muscular organ sitting right between the esophagus and the duodenum. It has 4 main regions: the cardia, fundus, body, and the pyloric part. The wall has 4 major layers: serosa, muscularis, submucosa, and mucosa. And remember that muscularis is special because it has 3 layers of its own: longitudinal, circular, and oblique. Now for the key gastric cells and what they secrete. Mucus cells produce mucus. Parietal cells secrete HCl and intrinsic factor. Chief cells give us pepsinogen. And finally, G cells are responsible for gastrin. And lastly, lock in those 5 major functions: storage, mixing, digestion, protection, and controlled emptying. That is the core of what the stomach actually does every single day. So that is the stomach in a nutshell. If this explainer made stomach physiology a bit easier to digest, pun totally intended, definitely save it for your revision. And make sure to subscribe to Study with Amphine for more straightforward anatomy and physiology lessons, perfectly tailored for nursing, medical, and allied health students. Up next, we're continuing on journey through the digestive system by tackling the small intestine. See you there.